Well, the Fed has embarked on this program of quantitative tightening. This is what I'm basing all of my predictions on for this year. The Fed is gonna. They're saying that the Fed's gonna have to back off the pedal. The Fed's gonna have to stop this program, because the ones who are really taking a close look at this, really scrutinizing this. Let's see, what do they say here? The math behind quantitative tightening, why it will end early. Yes, it's going to end early. Because what's going to happen is it's one of those things where you don't see the profound effect of it until all of a sudden everything crashes. That's why it's going to end early. It's going to end this year. Quantitative tightening is going to end. They've never done this before. They don't know what the effects of it are going to be, the Fed, and they're going to find out what the effects of it's going to be, because what they're doing is drying up liquidity within the system. First off, to really understand what's going on, we need to go to an article here, and I'm going to have to start the charts. That's what I'm going to have to do. Let me get prepared here just a second. Okay, let's start the charts here. Now, let me pull the chart down and get it on the right spot here. I'm going to go to an article. Let me see, what article was it? Fed shift to quantitative. No, that wasn't it. Fed's balance sheet. There's something in the market. This is it. There's something in the market that doesn't add up. It says here, let me pull this in so you guys can see it, because this is important. Now, they've been feeding us this line about how the economy right now is undergoing inflation. Everything's picking up steam. The whole world's picking up steam. We're all starting to go into this inflation, and this is a boom, an economic boom that's beginning, and all this kind of stuff. Outside the United States, we see little evidence that inflation is accelerating. Well, I'm going to tell you what. We see little evidence that inflation is accelerating inside the United States as well. They've been fudging the numbers, and they've been pulling this whole thing like they pulled on us before when they talked about this economic recovery that was fake. Now this is just another head fake. It says, outside the United States, we see little evidence that inflation is accelerating. Korea's PPI fell further to 1.2%. No evidence of rising inflation there. In China, the producer price index fell to a one-year low. Yet another sign we don't have any rising global inflation. On Friday, the European Central Bank measured the Eurozone inflation for January, and it came in at 1.3% overall, and has been fairly steady declining since reaching a peak of 1.9% last April. So it's declining from 1.9% to 1.3% in the European Union. This morning, saw that Japan's consumer price index rose for the 13th straight consecutive month in January, rising 0.09 from a year ago's levels, excluding fresh food and energy. The increase was just 0.04%. Again, not exactly a hair-on-fire pace. In other words, examining the world for inflation right now, we don't see it. We don't see this on-fire economy springing up all over the world, here, there, and everywhere. We see China's actually struggling. They're trying to use their new Belt and Road Initiative to try to spur the world's economy. And it's the only real driver of the world's economy right now, is the hope of money coming in from China. Other than that, everything's just basically bouncing along, just getting by. And in the United States, look how many stores we have closing. Sears is closing all of their outlets. Retail is going down the drain. And let's face it, an awful lot of people work in retail. I think that they've been fudging the numbers all along, because they're caught between a rock and a hard place, the Fed is. They have to raise interest rates, and they know this, or the economy is going to fall down the toilet hole. And if they don't raise interest rates, and they need to have this thing to spur on, they're ignoring They're even ignoring evidence that's right in front of their face, like the Fed ignored that 10% drop that we had in the stock market a couple weeks ago. They basically ignored it. That's a warning sign from the stock market for them to quit with this program that they got going. But they're not going to quit with it because they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They have to move forward with this. So let's take a look at this article from Seeking Alpha right here. The math behind quantitative tightening and why it will end early. Now, quantitative tightening, what they're basically doing is they started it last year. And for the first 3 months, they were only doing $10 billion a month, and it was barely noticed for October, November, and December. Okay? Barely noticed, right? Now, what happened was at the first month of January, for January, February, and March, they're going to do $20 billion a month, right? This is what they decided to do, increase it from $10 billion to $20 billion. Well, come the 30th of January, they had to do the first $20 billion. What happened? About a week later, we had the stock market react to the $20 billion. Okay? And it was a profound reaction to the stock market. And they've basically ignored that reaction the Fed has. Okay? So what's going to happen is they're going to do their $20 billion. And what's happened is the markets now have priced that $20 billion in. They're going to do their $20 billion for January, February, and for March. Okay? Now, the markets have priced that $20 billion in, and so has the bond market. The bond market has went up on the 10-year yield to basically 2.88, 2.9. Okay? It's priced in the $20 billion a month. But now, come the end of March, they're going to raise it to $30 billion a month. And so it's not gonna start at first. It's gonna hit us in April, just like it didn't hit us in January. It hit us in February. Okay? So it's not gonna hit us in March. They're raising the $30 billion. It's gonna hit us in April and in May. And this is why I've been talking about, because when they raise from 20 to 30, every time they go up 10 billion, they're adding to the effect. Now, you see, when they started at 10 billion, the effect was only small. But when they raised to 20, we saw what the stock market did, how it reacted. Now, what's it going to do when they raise it to 30? The reaction's going to be that much more profound. And the stock market has been primed for a crash. The pattern that we're seeing right now in the stock market is the pattern of a dead cat bounce. Basically, and if that bounce will last until this quantitative tightening takes hold, we could see the big crash in April or May, and that's going to be a reaction to them raising to $30 billion, right? Because what they're doing is they're drying up liquidity fast. Now I have to go down this article here, and I have to show you a chart of what they're doing. And this is probably the most important chart that you will actually see. This is the M2 money supply, I guess. Let me see. Money supply growth with estimated Federal Reserve tightening. Okay. Now what we're going to do is look at the money supply. And we're going to see, this is, now part of this chart right here is projected. Okay, so we're going to focus in on it a little bit. On this chart, and we're going to go back to the 2008 crisis, and this is the money supply, and this is the effects of Federal Reserve. Now, this in the red box here is the blue part. From here to here is projected, okay? But their projections are right, because this is what quantitative tightening is starting to do. We can see this was the crash of 2008 back here. See? And we felt the effects of that, didn't we? Now, when they started the quantitative easing, this is the effect right here, coming back up out of the hole. Okay? Monetary policy, quantitative easing. And so, this is what brought us out of this. This would have destroyed everything if they had let it continue, the Fed. Right here. This downslide we had right here would have destroyed everything if they had let it continue. But they didn't let it continue. They come in with monetary policy, and they pumped it back up again, right, after 2008. And then we've been drifting along ever since until now. Now what they're doing is they're quantitative tightening. They're drying the money up, and it's having exactly the same effect as we saw in 2008, except we didn't start from such a high position. Look how high the position was when we started here, right? Now, look at back in 2008. Look at what a high position we were. Now, when we started here, we weren't as high, right? And now we're coming down the mountain, just like in 2008. Now, the blue line is projected, okay? And what we're going to see happen is if they continue with this quantitative tightening, we're going to see that projected blue line actually happen in the next few months. If you look right here, you can see that it started just before the end of 2017. It started coming down, and that's when they started this quantitative tightening. October, November, and December, $10 billion a month, along with the raising the interest rates. And they haven't stopped raising the interest rate, too. They're going to raise the interest rate again in March. So along with raising the interest rate, and because they can't let the yield curve flatten too much, see? So they have to raise the interest rate. And here's the problem they're facing, is as they increase this quantitative tightening, they're going to be drying up liquidity out of the system extremely fast. They say here how much liquidity they're going to dry out of the system. It's going to be absolutely incredible. Let me go back here. Because of the multiplier, it says the Federal Reserve has laid out a pace of reducing the balance sheet or contracting the monetary base by $10 billion a month and increasing it to $50 billion per month by the end of 2018. Given their pace, the average reduction is roughly $30 billion per month. Giving the money multiplier of 3.55%, a $30 billion reduction in the monetary base will reduce the money supply by just over $100 billion per month, assuming the money multiplier holds constant. The money supply is currently increasing at a pace of roughly $50 billion per month. The rate of monetary tightening is going to cause a rapid decline in the money supply. See, this is what it's going to do in the M2 money supply. It's going to cause this what I showed you earlier, this rapid decline in the M2 money supply because of this tightening. And what's this going to lead to, ultimately, is there's always a lag effect in the economy. When you take an action, sometimes 2 or 3 months later, the results of that action will actually show. So, that little crash we had in the stock market in around February, a couple weeks ago, that little market crash that we had of 10%, that was probably the direct result of October, November, and December's quantitative tightening program of $10 billion a month. Now, the results of the $20 billion a month haven't really been felt yet, and they're already going to move to $30 billion a month. You see? And because of this lag, the big crash is going to be felt down the road. It's going to come suddenly out of nowhere, just like that last crash come, but it's going to be 3 times bigger. So, if we drop down from 26,500, what do we drop down to? I can't remember now exactly. I'd have to go through the market. I'm not going to go to the market right now. I'm going to finish this talk. But we dropped thousands of points in the market. This is going to be 3 times bigger. I'm predicting that when the fear it generates too is going to compound the effect. I'm predicting a market drop of probably somewhere in the vicinity of lower than 14,000. Quite seriously. I'm predicting a massive drop in the market. Probably something like in the order of 40%. And this is going to cause institutions to start to go down. It's going to cause disruptions in the because of the interest rates have been rising too, and they're going to continue rising. This is going to cause disruptions. It's going to cause a meltdown in the derivatives markets and in the banks, in the banking systems. This crash, and what the knock-on effects is going to be is the system's going to start to shut down, like 2008. The system's going to start to shut down. Very similar to 2008, except a more powerful event. And they're going to have to react to it. They're going to react to it at the Federal Reserve. Is going to react to it. So is the central banks of Canada, the central banks of Great Britain, the central banks of Japan. All these central banks are going to react to it, and they're going to actually stimulate to the point where they actually cure the problem. But in doing so, they're finally going to flip everything over into what we need for hyperinflation. They're going to set up the scenario for hyperinflation to begin. And the hyperinflation is going to begin after they're done fixing this problem. We're going to experience then, after they fix this problem, the first economic recovery we've ever had in a long time, going back before 2008, because they're going to increase the money supply. They're going to stop. What they're doing right now is absolute foolishness. This tightening into weakness is absolute foolishness. And they're using the media to try to fool us into thinking that they're not tightening into weakness, that they're tightening into strength. But the truth is they're really tightening into weakness. This is absolute foolishness, and it can only end in disaster. And the disaster, then when they have to fix the disaster, then they're going to create the scenario for hyperinflation. And this is what's coming. And it's coming this year. It's almost like whiplash. When you're in a car and you get hit from behind, the first reaction is to whip back this way, right? Now, but the next reaction is to whip back the other way. It's almost like whiplash, what we're going to experience. First, deflation, with this car hitting us from behind and deflating us. And then on the opposite side of that is going to be the inflation that's going to carry us forward. So it's almost going to be like, to explain this, and this is why an awful lot of people, when they listen to what I've been talking about, they have trouble understanding it, because first I talk about deflation, and then I talk about hyperinflation, and the two don't go together. And so they say, how are we going to have deflation if we're going to have inflation? And they start to get confused when they listen to me talk. An awful lot of my audience actually starts to get confused. They say, you say one thing, and then you say something else, because they're getting confused about whether I'm talking about deflation or inflation. And that's because this is going to be a whiplash event where we actually have both, first one and then leading to the other. And it's very confusing to understand that, how it actually works. But after you're done living it, then you'll look back and say, hey, you know what? That did happen that way, and that was really weird. And if you play it right, you can become rich. But if you play it wrong, you're going to lose everything. So listen, thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next show. Bye-bye.